Okay, this is the lecture on space, and to begin with, I would like to read you a little bit of something about this element. Space is a very real and important element of three-dimensional design, but it is difficult to conceptualize. Space is a three-dimensional field with which the artist works. It may include unfilled as well as filled areas, or what are referred to respectively as negative and positive areas. The positive space is the part of the work that physically occupies space. The negative space is the unfilled space that is activated by the piece. Although a good artist works with both kinds of space at the same time, viewers' experiences of negative space are so subtle and subjective that it is hard to define and measure. The use of two-dimensional photographs further limits understanding of spatial concepts, for these subtle experiences change as the viewer moves. So, with all of those limitations, we're going to go ahead and try and see how artists use this element. And this will include delineated shapes in space, activated surrounding space, confined space, spatial relationships, scale, and illusionary space. So first off, let's take a look at delineated forms in space. So this is, actually a piece occupying space, right? But the interesting thing about this, here's this delineated form in space. We also have this, what we sometimes call negative space, or in a few chapters ago, negative form. But what you get a sense here is that this space in here is so integrated into this piece. It almost looks like it's pushing out, right? The way this is stepped back. It almost looks like this space has a force to itself and is pushing this way or this up this way. Or perhaps maybe space is pushing in on these forms here, just the way it's held up in the air with these welds, obviously. But it's an interesting idea, the way it makes us feel about it. Okay, we've seen this before, this Namgabo piece. All right, so in this piece, this is a delineated form in space, but actually the space is the real emphasis here, the real focal point. And as you can see, it kind of looks like an eyeball, doesn't it? I want to read you also what Namgabo says about his use of space here. Space is not a part of the universal space surrounding the object. It is a material by itself, a structural part of the object, so much so that it has the faculty of conveying a volume, as does any other rigid material. Really interesting way to look at it, and I think on that last image, we saw the same sort of thing. Oh, come on. Alrighty, why are we not doing this? Okay, so now we're going to talk a little bit about activated surrounding space, this sort of spatial presence that can only be sensed. And when I'm talking about this, as you might have guessed, this is all very subjective. I mean, people react in different ways, just like when you walk up to somebody and you're, or they walk up to you and they're like 4 inches in front of your face and you kind of want to back away. For them, it's okay. For you, it's like, yuck, stand back. So it's kind of like that, but we'll talk about it in a very general way. So in this one, oftentimes artists will use things like the way the direction that eyes are looking. So here's the mother looking off into space. So the feeling is that she is activating far more space than is just her delineated form in space. There's this sort of undefined area that she occupies just by that look. The same with the child. Maybe a little bit shorter space. Hers looks like it's a long look. Who knows about the kid here? But anyway, that's one way to activate space, is with these eyeballs, this eye contact, extending off into the distance. This is actually a model for a very much larger, actually a monumental sort of piece, like just shy of 100 feet tall. But this piece by George Rickey, it's called North Lines Vertical. It's a kinetic piece. It is made of stainless steel rods, and these pointed parts point out into space. The idea is this would be a public sculpture. The wind would make those metal wands spin around. So you can only imagine being close to one of these big, I can't even imagine how big these would be, maybe 20 feet long, something like that, with pointed ends that are spinning in space, maybe slowly, but nonetheless, you have no idea what's going to happen there. That's sort of like that personal space. You don't really know. You kind of have a feeling that you want to stay in the back. So this would be a very cool piece. And I don't really know whether it actually ever was fully built. Pieces like Stonehenge, here's another, talk about monumental pieces. Even from a distance, you get a sense of what kind of an awesome, colossal, spatial presence this thing has. You can't particularly go there anymore. I think there's a fence around it at this point. But in the old days, you could walk inside here and it would be like being, there's some kids games, where you're surrounded by a group of people with their hands held or something, or dodgeball. I mean, there's this weird presence of the space that you're in. Well, this would be even that 100 times more, because these are so tall. They're about 13 and a half feet high, I guess. We're going to talk a little bit about something called participatory space, where you take part with the sculpture. So in this piece by Clement Meadmore, it's called Upstart. It's about 20 feet tall, welded Corten steel. But even some of these large works are sort of welcoming and meant to be touched. I've seen pictures of people hoisting themselves up there and eating their lunch on top of this thing. So sometimes sculptures become seating or a place to hang out, put stuff on, participate with it. Then we move into things like virtual reality systems. This one exists only in the monitors recording the viewer's movements, feeding back visual information. You guys probably know a whole lot more about this than I do, but you feel like you're in a much larger space when in fact you can see this person is kind of harnessed in this thing, but through what he's looking and I guess how he reacts, things change. I'm going to guess you guys deal with all kinds of games that use the same sort of thing, maybe. This is not the slide I want. All right, we're going to look at this now anyway. Okay, so let's take a look at confined space. I hope you guys can see that the contrast is good enough on this. This is Joseph Cornell, who is really well known for his boxes. I think maybe one of your final projects has to do with a box. And I would generally look at Joseph Cornell for some kind of guiding images on that, because he does such an amazing job. Anyway, this is called Suite de la Longitude. So he's making a confined space of his choosing in this relief work. Inside here, this is probably only about 4 inches deep. We've got these circles that look like orbits. We've got this big planetary type sphere. We've got a globe in this corner, little glasses. They're containing marbles that are like little planets. We've got some more marbles down here. It all has kind of a real planetary feel about it. Ironically, it's sort of infinite space that he's referring to, and yet this is a little glass-fronted box that he put it all inside. The other thing that draws you in here is he's got writing in the back and even on the sides here, and so you're compelled to kind of come up to try and make sense. I mean, also, where is this? What is this sphere? What is this planet? You can see a little part of some kind of landmass over here. But once you get up here, you find that the words are all in French. So good luck with that. So anyway, confined space, these little boxes. I threw this into this whole little sidetrack here about gallery and museum installations, which are also art going into a confined space, not just about one piece being confined space, but many pieces. This is kind of a cool one. It's confined space, but it's also a participatory space, right? It's a little miniature version of a museum. To see it, you stick your head inside this confined space. You participate in this funny replica of a museum installation. I wanted to show you some more installations. Here's another one that you can walk in and around. The whole space is taken up with these kind of carnivorous looking animals, right? That are kind of leaping towards this jump that they're making. They're jumping through space very actively, and they're over here and they hit this plexiglass wall here, and then they're kind of tumbling down onto the ground. I don't know what this piece is about, but it's kind of eerie and terrifying, really. I mean, these animals don't really look that friendly, and you're just sort of watching them self-destruct. Pretty cool piece. Here's another one within a confined space. This is a site-specific space built to fit right within this room here. It's called Wave Surge, and you can see they've used, looks like strips of wood, like they would make plywood out of, just these thin wooden strips that can take on a very fluid feeling about it. And so it's being made into a wave, and here you are ready to have this thing crash down on you. You really get a sense of sort of oceanic upheaval here. Kind of neat. And these boardwalks really being ripped apart, like you're in the middle of some kind of disaster. This is kind of another sort of confined space. They weren't really talking about necessarily this foyer that they stuck this Tony Smith piece, which is called Smoke. But it feels like it is in a confined space. So the artist did not make the confined space. But I think the feeling is you would walk down these stairs and really almost be compelled to walk through this big plywood sculpture. And you would get a feeling of kind of this oppressive, crowded feeling. It makes us real uncomfortable to walk in here. Maybe the feeling, I always try and figure out what the title means. Maybe how, if you're in a fire and the smoke is pouring in, it usually goes to the ceiling and makes you feel compressed. You're supposed to crawl out of the room on your belly, right? Anyway, a feeling that makes you feel part of the confinement. Another sort of confined space. Artists can kind of manipulate how people experience a space or an environment. This is in the courtyard of a county courthouse in New York. It's kind of a cool building, but it always makes me think of that prison in Shawshank Redemption or something. I don't know. There's something kind of oppressive about its institutionality or something. But you would walk into this space, and I think it does have an oppressive look. But to get there, you go through this courtyard with greenery and a babbling fountain out here where you could escape from the building at lunch, come down here, sit in the sun and have your lunch or whatever. But, oftentimes architects, landscape architects and designers will introduce these spaces for you to escape to get away. More confined space. Here we've got this building. This is the TWA terminal in New York. And you get a sense just looking at this thing. We're going to take a look at the outside of this confined space, right? The inside of this building is confined space. It has the look of soaring, of flight, of the wings of airplanes that are just kind of out the back there on the runway, right? It kind of makes you think about the whole concept of flight even before you enter the space. And here within the confined space, you get even more of the feeling, more of these kinds of arcs and wing-like projections and volumes and masses. They really want you to feel excited about taking an airplane ride with TWA. Now we're going to look a little bit into spatial relationships, sometimes the spatial relationships between forms, forms in settings, and between forms and viewers. So there again, architects and interior decorators like to control passageways and viewpoints and corridors to give you views, etc., or just lead you where they think you should be going. In Japanese gardens with this very limited space, right? I mean, you can see here, kind of this cramped, if you've ever been in one, there's one in the Golden Gate Park. You guys should go visit. But, Japan is an island nation. It doesn't have infinite space like we do. It can be very crowded there in the cities, etc. So the respite from all of that is sometimes these Japanese gardens where there are winding paths and you're sort of guided to stop at certain places to take a look at important spots. They provide benches. There are stepping stones that kind of limit what you're walking even is like. There will be visual barriers with the plantings. There may be small openings that give you, instead of grand vistas, but sort of short views. And these views may be of, miniature trees, these little bonsai plants and things like that. Instead of a river, I mean, we've got this little brook, but in this miniaturized space, it kind of makes you feel like maybe it could be bigger, right? So you go along here, you take a stop here. It's a long journey in a small space. Pretty wonderful. Here's another view of the Japanese garden. Places to stop, these really brilliant focal points along the way, or walking on this bridge, which really is a very condensed and very high, cramped version of a bridge. Here's another pathway piece. This is Blenheim Palace, and out here in this garden area, you have a pathway which is in the form of like a maze that controls where you walk, but there's actually no visual obstruction. So you can see where you are. You can kind of gauge where you are in terms of the fountain and the building, other people that are there, to the whole garden and the vista beyond. But you are really sort of, they are making the way that you relate to the space. They're kind of guiding you through. Another spatial relationship. These are sculptures of California condors with their actual life size, which means that their wings are like 9 to 10 feet across. So to walk in this space, and they all come in modules, so each separate space will have the installing of it will kind of guide you to how you're going to feel in here. This room feels like it has high ceilings and everything, but oftentimes they are made into 2 rows of these things. So you're walking between them, like in a corridor between these, and you have a real sense of the hugeness of these creatures. And some of them look like they're taking off. I mean, it's there again, that idea of, ooh, I better watch out because I'm going to get whipped by these snappy little ends of the wings there. Here's another view in the artist's studio, which, as you can see, is not a huge volume of space. So if you were walking next to these here, you would even feel more cramped. Here's the condors themselves. I don't know if you can see that very well. And then we're going to talk a little bit about scale, which I brought up before with proportion, because to me they're kind of related in a way. But scale is the size of an object in relationship to other objects and to its surroundings. Oftentimes in scale, we relate it to ourselves, to humans, is often how it's looked. So this artist, Charles Matten, likes to make little miniature versions of libraries. So you would look at this space, and with the use of mirrors that kind of go back and forth, it makes you think that this is a vast space, when in fact these pieces are usually they're like 30 inches by 26 inches height and width, and the depth is usually 20 some inches, but with the use of mirrors and things and perspective, it makes you think that they're grand. There again, these are miniatures. You can see relationship to somebody's arm here, how this is manipulated. So talking about scale, right? These are miniature in scale. Then we have monumental works. You've seen some others of Claes Oldenburg's pieces of, I think I showed you the clothes clip. This one, what's this called? Spoonbridge Cherry Sculpture. Okay, so you're out in a park. You could, you're not supposed to, but you could actually, and people do, climb up and walk across the handle of this spoon to get out to the end here. To see this big cherry at the kind of precariously flipping up at the end of the spoon, you can see out the top here, there's this really humorous little sprinkling of water. It's actually a fountain. You would feel kind of like an ant next to this playful thing. To get a sense here, the stem on this cherry is 12 feet high. So it's huge. I'm going to talk a little bit, move into illusionary space where artists, and 2D artists do this all the time, right, with perspective and everything. But in 3D works, we often see this in stage sets. We also saw this in that little library, that little miniature library, this illusionary space. Also with those Japanese gardens, we sort of get the feeling like they're giving us an expansive look, right, by the miniature pieces, but in fact, they're really quite small. So in the stage set, and this is a piece by David Hockney. It was done for the opera The Magic Flute. The perspective in it makes it look like it's like the stage goes way back, when in actuality, this stage set is only 12 inches deep. The weird thing about this is it's so crisp looking. It's the making of it, the painting of this is so crisp all the way back into the back. It has sort of a surreal feeling where, in fact, in stage sets, there's often a forced perspective and an atmospheric perspective. An atmospheric perspective is what they use in two-dimensional works to make some areas with more detail and crisper look closer, and the further away you get, the hazier it is. Like mountains look hazier and lighter as they recede in space. So anyway, artists can use this sort of illusionary space. And I think that's all I'm going to show you today. So space. Forms, but space is also can be just as useful and should be employed by the artist, both the space and the form, if you're really doing it.